Hi, and welcome to Social Judgment Theory of Muzaffar Sharif. Here's where we're going. We're going to discuss the three latitudes: acceptance, rejection, and non-commitment, ego involvement, how much do you care, judging the message, contrast and assimilation errors, discrepancy and attitude change, practical advice for the persuader, attitudes on sleep, booze, and money, evidence supporting social judgment theory, and critique. How wide is your theoretical latitude of acceptance? Social judgment involvement is the perception and evaluation of an idea by comparing it with current attitudes. A reference group are groups that members use to define their identity. A latitude of acceptance is the range of ideas that a person sees as reasonable or worthy of consideration. A latitude of rejection is the range of ideas a person sees as unreasonable or objectionable. The latitude of non-commitment is the range of ideas that a person sees as neither acceptable nor objectionable. Take a second and look at this example of applied social judgment theory. At the top, you have the latitudes of rejection, acceptance, non-commitment, and again rejection. And on the bottom, you have the specific application to airline safety. Ego involvement. How much do you care? Ego involvement is the importance or centrality of an issue to a person's life, often but not necessarily demonstrated by membership in a group with a known stand. The high linkage with closely held values and self-concept is a critical part of ego involvement. With high ego involvement, the latitude of non-commitment is almost non-existent. There's a wide latitude of rejection. Extreme positions and higher ego involvement go together. Judging the message, contrast and assimilation errors. We use anchored attitudes as comparison points when we hear discrepant messages. Contrast is a perceptual error whereby people judge messages that fall within their latitudes of rejection as further from their anchor than they really are. Contrast is a perceptual distortion that leads to polarization of ideas when a message falls within the latitude of rejection. Assimilation is a perceptual error whereby people judge messages that fall within their latitudes of acceptances as less discrepant from their anchor than they really are. This takes place when a message falls within the latitude of acceptance. Discrepancy and attitude change. Judging how close or how far a message is from an anchored position is the first stage of attitude change. The shifting of the anchor is second. If a message is within the latitude of acceptance, we adjust our attitude. The boomerang effect is when attitude change is in the opposite direction of what the message advocates. Listeners are driven away from rather than drawn to an idea. Practical advice for the persuader. Select messages that fall at the edge of the listener's latitude of acceptance. Ambiguity can serve better than clarity. True conversion from one end of the scale to the other is a rare phenomenon. Seek small, successive movements. Attitudes on sleep, booze, and money, evidence supporting social judgment theory. Social judgment theory requires highly ego-involving issues where strong resistance to some persuasive message is likely. The stronger the interpersonal bonds in the reference groups, the greater the likelihood of influence. In a study on sufficient sleep, students read an article by an expert, and the change was very small. As the hours were reduced to 3, less fell outside of their latitude of acceptance. In the alcohol consumption study, the message that most, in other words, 63%, drank 0 to 5 when they partied, students lowered their estimate from 5.3 to 4.9 drinks. So there was a measurable effect lowering alcohol consumption. Pluralistic ignorance is the mistaken idea that everyone else is doing or thinking something that they really aren't thinking or doing. In the discussion of asking for money, the fundraiser underestimated the donor's latitude of acceptance. The donor asked, "Do you really think that's enough?" And the donor increased the donation 25%. The sleep study results are illustrated in this graph. On the left, you have students' post-message opinion of sleep needed in hours, and on the bottom, you have the optimal sleep advocated by the expert in hours. Critique. How wide is your theoretical latitude of acceptance? The application of social judgment theory has practical utility. The trick is figuring out latitudes of acceptance, non-commitment, and rejection. Research on social judgment theory is relatively small, so there's a lot of opportunity for research. Despite questions that surround social judgment theory, it is an elegant conception of the persuasion process. So here's where we went. We discussed 3 latitudes: acceptance, rejection, and non-commitment. We discussed ego involvement, how much do you care, judging the message, contrast and assimilation errors, discrepancy and attitude change, practical advice for the persuader, attitudes on sleep, booze, and money, evidence supporting social judgment theory, and we ended with the critique. How wide is your theoretical latitude of acceptance?